tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
I want to talk about this story, which has not gotten a lot of coverage. In fact, as of last look, had no coverage in the mainstream media. And that is the amendment put forward by the Liberals in committee to Bill C-21. This is the firearms regulation bill that's coming down the pipeline. And this amendment, I just want to read directly from the amendments that were put forward before committee. Changes the definition or adds to the definition of a prohibited firearm the following: a firearm that is a rifle or shotgun that is capable of discharging center-fire ammunition in a semi-automatic manner and that is designed to accept a detachable cartridge magazine with a capacity greater than 5 cartridges of the type for which the firearm was originally designed. Now, if you're a gun owner, you're seething right now. If you're not a gun owner, you're like, what the hell did he just say? It is a firearm that has a round of ammunition that's basically anything other than a 22, which is a little tiny cartridge, and has a magazine that takes more than 5 rounds of ammunition. Let's talk about why this matters. Rod Giltaca is here, head of the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Rod, good to talk to you as always. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So what types of guns are we talking about here that are not prohibited already by the Liberals that would be caught by this amendment?
Well, for all intents and purposes, it's center fire, semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that can take a detachable magazine. So there's some nuance there when you talked about a magazine or a firearm that was originally designed to take a magazine that could hold more than 5 rounds. There's a lot of nuance there, but basically any magazine-fed firearm could take a magazine that could hold more than the prescribed number of rounds if you get a hold of it. And who knows what it was designed for in the first place. It was just magazine fed. So I guess for purposes of our discussion, all semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that are center fire that accept removable magazines. And that's probably around 2 million firearms that are now going to be prohibited if that amendment is passed into the bill and the bill is passed through the Senate and receives royal assent.
One of the things that I find interesting about this is that there's been a lot in Canada of haggling over magazine limits. And oftentimes on firearms, there's a pin in a magazine, so it could theoretically take more rounds, but government regulation has capped it at 5 rounds. Would a magazine that is pinned to 5 rounds, but could theoretically, if you were to illegally remove that pin, take more, would that satisfy this, in your view?
Well, the way that it's worded is quite ambiguous, and those are the kinds of laws that the government seems to love. They don't like, straightforward stuff. But the way that it's written, it's like, I guess we'll use the most infamous rifle ever, which is the AR-15, which is just another semi-automatic rifle, just like any other. It was designed originally to have a 30-round magazine. But of course, in Canada, we can't have those. It's apparently too dangerous. So we have a pin inserted, a rivet, to limit it to 5 rounds. But that firearm was originally designed to hold to use a 30-round magazine. And so thus it would now be prohibited. If the original design had some stubby little 5-round magazine, it would apparently be okay. So again, more completely nonsensical, ridiculous rules designed for one reason. It's just to punish people that are unlikely to vote for the Liberals.
Yeah, and this abandons, in my view, the pretense. I mean, it was long gone, I'm sure you and I could agree, but really abandons the pretense that nothing that the Liberals are doing targets sport shooters and firearms owners that own guns for hunting, which has always been their line. Because, Justin Trudeau's explanation, no one needs an AR-15 to take down a deer. Okay, well, when they're talking about shotguns and other semi-automatic centerfire rifles that are used for hunting, people who don't know guns don't realize that they're just blatantly misinforming people.
Yeah, it's all gaslighting. Long gone are all the promises that they're not going to affect hunters or sport shooters or anyone else. They're coming for everything. So, I have a few firearms of my own, and I'm not unique in that. If I look through my gun cabinet, I'm probably going to have a couple of guns left after all the dust is settled. So they're coming after basically everything other than lever actions. There may be some pump action shotguns that will be prohibited too, which is a dangerous precedent. So all of those will end up going. You may have single shot, like break action, shotguns left, and some bolt action rifles. And for some people, that's enough. For most people, there isn't. But there's always the question: how do you justify doing this? Like, why are you doing this to all these people? And they keep saying public safety. And of course, it's, they don't offer any proof of that. So yeah, just the gaslighting continues. And why they're doing this, it's anyone's guess.
Well, and I think it's important to not look at C-21 in isolation either. And I think for that, we go back to 2020 and that initial prohibition of 1,500 types of mostly semi-automatic rifles. And then you follow that with their efforts to ban handguns. And then you follow that with this latest amendment in C-21. And you are right that at a certain point, they're attacking in very rapid succession almost every type of firearm, except for, like at the end of it, it's going to be you can have a Revolutionary War musket, and that'll be it. And then that'll go.
Well, it's apparently they're going to include the SKS in this and some rimfire rifles as well, just because they look scary. This is they're, it's funny because
even one of those like tactical looking 22s, which I think most gun owners think are kind of ridiculous, but those 22s that look scary, they could be prohibited in your view.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think the salient point here is everything that the Liberal government says, and let's not forget the culpability of the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, because they're supporting this too. Everything they say to you is a lie. It is a lie, top to bottom. And first it's like, oh, it's only these guns, just these dangerous assault weapons. Are they assault weapons? No, but we're going to call them assault style, so that's close enough. So they had that whole thing. We're going to buy them back. It's like, no, we're not going to buy them back. It's almost 3 years later, nothing's forthcoming. They have nothing. Then it's like, well, handguns. Oh, we're not. And then of course, I went to committee on Bill C-21, and I have the NDP MP, Alistair McGregor, say, well, nobody's really banning your handguns, right? It's a freeze. Let's be clear. And I'm like, what do you mean? If I have handguns, so if I die, the RCMP are going to come to the house. They're going to take them from my grieving widow and my kids that are licensed, and they're going to take them without any compensation and destroy them. And they'll take them by force. They'll be like, well, either you give them up or you go to jail. So, but it's not a ban. Don't call it a ban. So I think you were just talking about the Emergencies Act inquiry and how they keep saying these things, even though they're demonstrably untrue. And I mean, this is a government. These are a group of people I don't think that we've ever seen before, not at this level.
No, and you and I have talked about this in the past, and you were very graciously a big supporter of and star in the documentary I did about this a year and a half back. And the public education about guns has always been, I think, very poor. And it's not for lack of effort on the part of gun owners. It's that gun owners are a very small minority, relatively speaking, of the Canadian population. And you have a lot of urbanites in this country that have never encountered a gun and, to their knowledge, have probably never met a gun owner that really buy into the narrative that they're fed by the government and fed by a lot of the mainstream media in this country. And when stuff like this happens, it's terrible that if a conservative leader puts forward a very sensible opposition to this, they get cast into that, oh, he wants everyone walking around, with an AR-15 on the streets. It's like, no, that's not what's being debated here.
Yeah, they want to make assault weapons legal again. And I mean, it's such a misleading statement on its face, because assault weapons have been banned since 1977. So they'd actually have to clarify and say assault style weapons legal again. So it's the reason why it's so effective is it's a fear-based narrative, right? It's they are always, and when I say, I mean the Liberals, again, with the NDP right alongside them and the Bloc Québécois, they're marching the public using the government's resources, educational resources and media resources, marching them along, saying there's a direct connection between somebody like me that has a firearms license, that gets background checked every day, that has legal storage, that could have my home searched to make sure I'm storing my firearms properly, whose handguns are registered, whose AR-15s were registered, can only shoot those at an approved shooting rate, all that stuff. They're always trying to draw a line between people like me and the shootings that they see in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver. Their entire narrative is hung on that. So it's incredibly deceptive, but it is very effective because their side of the story can be told with taglines like "more guns equal more death." And it's like, well, for me to debunk that, it takes about 10 sentences, and you'll never get that on a mainstream legacy media format. So it's very effective that way, and that's what we're up against. And yeah, it's a difficult fight, but we're not going to just lay down and let them take them.
You mentioned the SKS. Now, just for people that don't know, the SKS, they're mass-produced Soviet, often rifles that you could just buy for dirt cheap because they're surplus. I mean, I think a lot of people get them for like under $200 back in the day. Maybe they're a little bit more now. They're semi-automatic. They're not particularly accurate. They're dirty, but they're fun to shoot. They're fun. They look cool. And there are, I don't know if there's an exact number, but I would assume there have to be tens of thousands of these in Canada right now, correct?
About 1 million of them.
1 million SKSs, and
Yeah.
they're non-restricted, which means that if you have a license, you buy one. It's not registered to you. Something like this, I feel is just logistically impossible to prohibit because you can't enforce it when you don't know where these things are. And so if the law-abiding, dutiful, diligent citizens will hand theirs back into the government, and the people that don't have regard for the law will still have them.
Well, there's a problem occurring here, Andrew, and the problem is that laws have to be reasonable and they have to be justified. When the government says we're going to use the capacity, to project force that you've paid for, it has to be justified. So what they're saying is we're going to use that force on you. Doesn't matter. This is part of our political agenda. And what happens is reasonable law-abiding people are just like, well, wait a minute. This isn't fair. This is wrong. You're extracting money and taxes from me in order to be able to do this to me. I'm going to consider noncompliance. And the minute that you start looking at a scenario that, like right now, what the government's doing, and you're like, a reasonable person might start considering noncompliance, like that is creating cracks. That's a violation of the social contract, is what they're doing right now. But it's creating cracks in our society, and that's bad. So, while this seems to be a big joke to Liberal MPs and Liberal supporters, while they think this is funny, doing this to, well, probably roughly 1 million Canadians are licensed to own these firearms. Well, I guess 2.2 million, but 1 million Canadians probably own these firearms. They seem to think this is funny, but it's not funny. It's very corrosive to our society. It's destroying the relationship, and an important one at that, between productive citizens and the government, and productive citizens and law enforcement, because somebody's going to come looking for those guns. And it's not going to be Justin Trudeau. He'll be hiding in the cottage, right? Just like he did during COVID. That's very corrosive to our society. So you got to really think about when you want to use government force and laws, and make sure that it's justified. So if you say it's for public safety, it has to be, and you have to prove that, or you're just destroying the social fabric of our country. And I think people forget that in this hyper-partisan time.
Up until a couple of months ago, I thought that the main ways you could combat this was the legal route, which I know the CCFR has taken and is taking about that order in council back in 2020. The political route, getting political leaders to enact change, and to a lesser extent, the public education route, which you hope then people will call on their politicians. But there's a new avenue that opened up in the last couple of months, which I think is a fascinating one, and that is provinces declaring that they will not enforce these laws. Alberta was the first, and then there was Manitoba, and then there was New Brunswick and Saskatchewan. So you've got 4 provinces here. I believe Yukon, I can't remember, there was a nuance with Yukon, but you've still got 4 provinces there that have said they do not believe this is an adequate use of police resources. And the federal government has really had to admit that it has no way of forcing them to enforce this law. So is that something you're optimistic about really driving in the future with other provinces?
Well, Alberta and Saskatchewan have both already put out statements that they are condemning this new amendment that was brought through in Bill C-21, or that was presented. It hasn't passed. They have the votes to pass it because, of course, the Bloc and the NDP will support them. But so there are some green shoots there as well. But I think the fact, going back to what you said in the beginning of your question, the fact that 4 provinces in a territory have said, you know what, we're not even going to cooperate with you, that should be another indication to the federal government. They should be like, well, wait a minute, maybe we should rethink what we're doing. Maybe what we're doing isn't right if we're actually having provinces rebelling against us. So, but this is, again, right, this is not your father or your grandfather's Liberal Party. This is an entirely alien group of people that I think are very dangerous for the country. And these kinds of people, they wouldn't think twice about what they're doing. They're like, well, I guess we got to push harder. I mean, we have to. People have to bend the knee to us. And normally, as you and I have known each other for a while, right? Like, I don't usually like to use language like this, but it's getting to the point where it's like, I find myself almost in the past defending the government and saying, well, maybe they just know not what they do. But man, this is just getting really crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, and a lot of police officers too that I've spoken to are themselves civilian gun owners, and some of them for very practical reasons because they don't get enough range time as police, so they train on their own and are enthusiasts, and they have no interest in enforcing these laws, and obviously they will ultimately if that's the direction. But I'm hopeful that more provinces will step up because again, we clearly the federal government is entrenched in this position, and I don't think Justin Trudeau or Bill Blair or Marco Mendicino are going to wake up one day and say, you know what, maybe the law-abiding gun owners aren't the problem. But if they're finding a resistance from the police that are supposed to uphold this, and by that I mean the provinces that are responsible for allocating those police resources, they'll have a law with no enforcement, and I think they'll have to kind of retreat with their tails between their legs.
I don't know. Again, I take no pleasure in being in the position right now where I'm like, I wouldn't put anything past them. I mean, we just heard that they were considering bringing tanks in to clear protesters.
Yeah. But
right?
it was not a semi-automatic tank. It was fine.
Yeah, it was a manually operated tank.
Yeah, it was a bolt action tank.
Exactly, right? Like it's such a strange time. I've been wrong as often as I've been right about how far they'll go. I don't think we can put anything past them. But as an organization, we're going to continue to fight against them. We're going to continue to try to get our message out to Canadians, right? That's really important. I'm hoping that Canadians, mainstream, middle of the road, centrist Canadians, which most of us used to be, right, in the days before we were labeled extremist, I'm hoping most people will come to their senses and go, these are not liberals. This is a very dangerous group of people, and they shouldn't be anywhere near power. And they're all going to show up and bring their friends and family in the next election and get rid of these people once and for all. That's what I'm hoping.
I know the CCFR has a lot of business members. Just anecdotally, have you heard about any upticks in sales of semi-automatics today? And I asked that because I know every other time the Liberals have tried to ban something, they become impossible to get because there's just a run on them.
Well, I mean, there probably would be. I haven't heard anything. It's only been a day. But yeah, a lot of people might run out and buy those guns that may or may not be on the list, but certainly would fit the description of centerfire semi-automatic with a detachable magazine. But at the same time, the Liberals have instituted a backdoor gun registry, which of course they promised not to do, but they've done it. So the government will know where all of those guns are, and they will just, I guess in theory, send people to come and take those guns away if people don't give them up voluntarily. So I don't know. That's going to temper sales quite a bit. But one interesting point of this whole thing, if you watch the meeting at committee for Bill C-21 yesterday, the Liberals did not include a buyback for any of these firearms. So their intent, as it stands today, is just to prohibit them all, and that's it. You get nothing.
Wow, just licensing themselves to do an all-out confiscation. Terrible stuff. We'll certainly follow this. Rod Giltaca from the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. Always a pleasure, and keep up the fight, sir.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.